Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. I think it's been a while since we've had a webinar, but I'm very pleased to see all of you on the call today. And we're going to be talking about geographic spread and tourism in South Africa. So we're all deep into 2025 already, and several years after that dreaded C word, which is when we had loads of webinars. But we are facing a bit of a paradox at the moment. We are seeing recovery of nearly 82% compared to pre-pandemic levels, but we're witnessing it being very specifically concentrated in certain areas. Cape Town and Kruger National Park are thriving. Cape Town certainly is flavor of the month. But what about the rest of our beautiful country? So David, in his way, got stuck in and asked lots of different people for lots of different information, and the data that we have received tells us quite a compelling story. At least 76% of the tourism that we are seeing, and please can I ask you to put yourself on mute if you are not on mute, thank you very much. At least 76% of our tourism spend is concentrated in those two regions, Cape Town and Kruger National Park. And then we have the situation where there is a kind of famine in lots of different areas of the country. So I am not an expert in this. Thankfully, we have an exceptional panel of industry leaders who are going to help us unpack this, but more importantly, try and help us resolve how to move forward so we can really expand that tourism footprint across the areas where we are seeing a feast. So introducing our panelists, David Frost, who's the CEO of SATSA. We have Ilana Clayton, who's the CEO of Travel Smart Crew. Helen Bolton, Head of Product and Sales at New Frontiers. Susie Bernardi, who's the Sales Director at Sense of Africa. Johan Groenewald, MD of Royal African Discoveries. And lastly, Monica Yule, the CTO of Westgrow, and she's waving. Okay, so logistics, guys, we are on a meeting. It always causes me a world of pain where we are a meeting, because that means everyone has the power to unmute themselves and talk, and we're a lot of people on this call. So may I please ask you to please keep yourselves on mute so that we can ensure that we are giving our panelists the space to share their insights. It is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you. And should you wish to weigh in, and of course we want you to weigh in with any questions that you have, please put those in the chat for us. You can already see the chat is open. We've had lots of comments on where people are and what the weather is like. That's where we are British. Right, let's begin. I'm going to hand over to David to tee us off, because he was the one who had the vision, having spoken to everybody about putting this all together. David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Natalia, and welcome everybody. A real treat to be back in the fray, so to speak. I mean, this is a bit of deja vu. I think, Nat, the last time we had an audience and a gathering of the size was inbound recovery in during COVID. But what has really transpired over the last couple of months is I just saw a dearth of data, and when I was at varsity, I was shit scared of accountancy, so I never became an accountant. Did the next best thing, which was economics, and it sort of stays in me that you just need to look at the data. And at the same time, there has been a lot of plaudits and for Cape Town in particular. I mean, World City, Time Out City of the Year. The marketing effort that Cape Town, the city, the province collectively have done has been world class, and it's certainly paying off. I mean, it really has taken its place as a sought after world class city destination. So there was a lot of quite legitimate, backpacking, from Cape Town, but that was the only noise that was being heard. And, I thought, well, that tended to mean that we've recovered, we're back to where we were in 2019. But when you go and actually have a look at the data, it was quite sobering that, in 2024, our overall overseas arrivals are only at 82%. And what was deeply concerning was that 3 of our top 4 markets were under 80%, namely the UK, Germany, and France. The US was back at 100, and it was certainly sort of great to see that. But then there was also the the sort of notional anecdotal feedback that the our top end lodges that border Kruger are also back to pre-pandemic levels and are doing well. So you've got Cape Town, the sort of nexus between Cape Town and Kruger, doing exceptionally well. But then we're at 82%. So that then, if you follow the logic, means that the rest of the country must be 60, 50, even less. So that was the sort of picture, and we sort of crunched numbers, and we had an idea of the overall recovery rate. Now, bear in mind, this is in contrast to our competitors in South in Kenya and Tanzania. Kenya up at 142% and Tanzania north of 120%. Very strong recovery, and we were lagging behind. I was then asked, Sally Gray of Red Carnation, who's based in what she calls the capital of the world in Durban, organised a meeting where they were having a meeting with Durban Tourism and all the private sector players in and around the greater Durban area to talk about the fact that Durban was really sort of lagging and was behind. And I reached out to Ilana Clayton, who I've worked with, over many years, and Ilana is an absolute beast when it comes to crunching numbers and being able to provide data. And I remember having done a provincial tourism strategy my pre-SATSA days when I was a fancy free footloose consultant, and we looked at Tourvest's numbers in the mid-noughties, and only 4% of their turnover went into KZN. So I asked Ilana to crunch the numbers, and she came back with a figure of 2.7% of Travel Smart Cruise 3.5 billion turnover in 23 was spent in KZN, and it was quite a shockingly low figure. So we had a very useful webinar, a useful meeting with the Durban tourism guys, and Ilana will talk about that, because part of the reason that we are in this position where our geographical spread has actually worsened post-COVID is there are exogenous, there are issues outside our control as the private sector, issues of safety, issues of road quality, and Alana will just unpack those in a little bit of detail when she speaks. But it's not the purpose of our webinar this afternoon to focus on that. The purpose is really to come together as the private sector and to say we're the ones who transact, either B2B or B2C. We're the ones who sell our country, and there I think has to be a different way of sort of going about it. And then I was, just on the back of the Travel Smart Crew combination, I reached out to TDM, to Tourvest, I reached out to New Frontiers and to Royal African, and I just want to thank all of those companies and the teams within each of them in the amazing way that they've not only crunched their numbers but shared them with us all. And in the article that preceded and led up to this, you can go and have a look at that data. But it's sobering. I mean, Travel Smart Cruise Mpumalanga spend outside Kruger was 0.8%. And a number of things sort of flow from this. Firstly, if we insist on selling every holiday to South Africa that has to have Cape Town and Kruger are full, well, maybe we're a 2.2 million arrival destination. Then we, take your marketing spend and, go and do something else with it. But that I think is a suboptimal way forward. And I certainly think it's incumbent on us to start this very necessary conversation about how we position our country and what we can do to do things a little differently that allows, firstly, growth to happen, and then also allows us to fulfill our, and we're the people who go and beat that drum about we're the big job creator, we're the second biggest economic sector of the economy. We can only fulfill those mandates if we are able to grow. And if we've got an artificial ceiling, that's a decidedly sort of unexciting space to sort of be in. So what we've done really as SATSA is engaged our members. This webinar is the start of, I think, a very necessary conversation, but it's by no means the end. We're not going to solve everything today. And I would certainly like to see an ongoing, almost monthly series of webinars where we draw in other actors. We need to draw in, today we're focusing quite sort of heavily on a DMC perspective. DMCs really act as product funnels in the main and have a key role to play in the transaction process. But let's bring in our product partners. Let's bring in South African tourism and bring in the other public sort of sector players that can also be part of this very, very, very necessary conversation. So I'm going to sort of leave it there. But my final comment is, because you're going to hear from the sort of real experts. But I do think one of the things we do need is better data. And one of the areas where we have an intrinsic feel that we are really good at, and that's repeater rates. So our inherent problem is a high awareness, low conversion. But once we get people here, it's safer, it's cheaper, it's friendlier, and it's easier to get around than a lot of other destinations. So our first timers, we've got to start conversations with, and we've got to have ongoing conversations. Either they're going to come back or they're going to be our best sort of exponents. But we need better data on that. And the other thing I think we also, in terms of data, need to sharpen a bit is the whole area of double counting, because it's great that the US is back at 100%, but the intuitive view is that at least up to a quarter of those arrivals, and maybe more, are double counted. They come in for a day in Joburg, they go to Bots, then they fly down to Cape Town, and then they go out. So I think data is going to be our friend going forward. But that, guys, is enough from me. I'll come in at the end of it. But I want to thank everybody, our panelists, and our companies for providing this very necessary data. And I just think, sorry, the last point from me and why this is also so useful is, talking to individual companies, we often sort of end up in our own foxholes. And, you're running your company, you hear that there's this noise that, Cape Town's doing really well, but you're not really seeing that. And it was quite instructive because we got some really good feedback emails. One of them was from my good friend Jumurme Locke down in the Cape. And Jumurme went and crunched his numbers, and guess what? 82% of his 2019 level. So Jeremy, you're a good herd man, and you're tracking the herd. But guys, enough from me. Let me hand back to Natalia, and really, really interested to hear what our panel has to say on the topic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David, for teeing it up. I'm going to go to Ilana first because she is always wonderful when it comes to detail. I mean, Ilana, you are the detail queen, and you were the person who stepped up initially and gave David the statistics that served as the base. So your data show that 76% of your turnover was concentrated in the Western Cape and the Kruger regions. And I'm not a numbers person, David. So beyond the statistics, perhaps you, Ilana, can tell us a little bit about those practical challenges that you face as a DMC when you are trying to sell experiences in those less visited provinces or even less visited areas within provinces, just to international visitors. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you, David. Hi, everybody. I'm not the great orator that I'm following in David and Natalia, so please excuse me. I feel like I mumble sometimes when I'm in front of a camera and a big crowd. So yes, absolutely. From our perspective, I look at and analyze stats and analyze figures, and it was quite surprising to me to see our growth in spend in areas like Kruger and Cape Town, and important for me to unpack that because geographical spend is so important to us, not just from a capacity point of view. We all know we're battling in Kruger and Cape Town for availability, for pricing that's being driven up, etc. But also from an experience point of view, we've prided ourselves on selling a multi-center destination for so long, and now it seems like we're reverting to a two-center destination with add-ons in Botswana and Vic Falls and Zambia. So how do we spread that? And why is the spread trend going backwards. And for me, it was when I started looking at our reasons for why, it fits so well for me into the Swiss cheese model. And if anybody knows or doesn't know of that model, it's used by aviation to de-risk and make flying safer. And it's understanding where those holes in those layers of cheese are, and where things go fundamentally wrong is where all the holes in the different layers of cheese in a very complex system fail. And where those holes all line up, that's where failure happens. And it's always indicative of a very complex list of reasons. There's no one reason why geographical spread isn't happening, but there are a lot of reasons. And just unpacking those, it became very clear to me that a lot of them we have absolutely no control over. Yes, some of them we do, and we need to find time to start counterbalancing that. But there are a lot of those trends that we have no control over. International trends are very, very critical. We've seen growth in the US market, certainly in spend, and in the 5-star market. You know, we may have fewer travelers, but they're definitely spending more. And then decline in your 3- and 4-star markets, your European markets. And typically for those for us were always more adventurous, more exploratory markets. Repeated travel is so critical for us because, you know, on a 2nd and 3rd visit, they'll go to more outlying areas, and those markets have not returned. A lot of the reasons for those also, you know, world politics, the threat of unrest. We have Americans who are concerned about cancelling, or concerned enough to cancel, and world economies as well also have a profound effect. You know, the UK market disposable income in the middle class is not where it was pre-COVID, and the reliance on that long haul dream holiday are being delayed and being pushed out because of lack of disposable income. But closer to home, there are a lot of other issues. You know, David touched on the safety and security issues. To get people to the outlying, to a lot of the outlying areas, requires an infrastructure, a road infrastructure, where we're really battling with road infrastructure in some provinces, in Mpumalanga, KZN, and the coal trucks. Load shedding is still a concern for international customers. You know, we have a rail network that is very affected by load shedding and cable theft. You know, protests in Mpumalanga, whether formal or informal, they do affect people. I sent friends to do an Mpumalanga panorama route self-drive in January, and literally everything was closed because of protest action of sorts. So these are all sorts of things that really do deter sending people out of the Kruger and Cape Town area, which are being really well promoted. The private sector are out there. They're walking the streets, going and seeing our customers. Wesgro is very active in talking to our trade partners and talking to us in their initiatives with things like great wine capitals, which I think has been phenomenal for us. You know, the Cape Town restaurants have done a lot to really elevate Cape Town as a food destination with all their awards. The safety and security issues, you know, we still got long memories of Sun City, of the KZN unrest, which is still there, the legacy issues, and maybe we haven't done enough to dispel sentiments around those sorts of things. You know, from a media perspective, it's very easy to find bad news on South Africa. It's a little bit harder to find positive messaging. And social media in a lot of ways is not our friend. And I don't know that we're, can we do more in those spaces? A couple of the other factors that we are struggling with, the skills shortage, I think that definitely contributes to the decline in geographical spread. Everybody that I talk to, we're doing a lot more with a lot less staff, and everybody's battling to find good staff or staff with product knowledge to be able to piece together the type of itineraries that they'd like to do. We're still sort of struggling with guides, and especially language guides. Just back to consulting staff, our international customers are reporting the same around skills and staff who've left the industry post-COVID. And when we're doing so much more with so much less, there's a lack of training. We don't have the same educational support we had previously, and getting people out of the office is a lot more difficult when we're just handling the volumes we are. So how do we address things like skills shortages? In terms of engaging with products, we've seen a lot of things post-COVID, and a lot of those are in the more outlying areas. Cutting of commissions that don't allow distribution through the international channel. And I think possibly the worst of this is our national parks, getting people into some of our national parks around the country. Some of them only offer us 10% commission. It's very difficult for trade to work on that. You've got Ezemvelo that's not VAT registered, so we've got to add VAT on. So before we even calculate the commission structure, we don't have a rate that's competitive out there.
It's like a laundry list of I feel so overwhelmed just even listening to all of it, to be very honest with you. But I'm always very pragmatic and someone who says, okay, what can I control? And there's a lot of stuff in there that I actually I can do absolutely nothing with. I mean, interestingly, from a Cape Town perspective, and you were talking about promotion, I think we miss a little bit of a trick, because we think that we are promoting Cape Town, that Westgrow is promoting Cape Town, etc. But what we also need to recognize is Cape Town is flavor of the month, and travelers promote Cape Town. So essentially, it's not just, we're not the gatekeepers of the promotion. We're looking at a whole gambit of people who are responsible for promoting different destinations. And it's not easy to promote a destination that is not flavor of the month, because everybody wants to go to that flavor of the month. Helen, you've just taken a swig of water, or I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, just my afternoon vodka.
Just your afternoon vodka. I'm going to move things over to you, because I heard famously that you said that you are on a mission to sell anything but the Cape. Okay.
Oh, so did I say that? I think David might have had too much champagne at that point. I'm going to have to feed myself here.
I think you should own the phrase, because I think it's quite cool. And coming over to you, can you tell me first of all, what sparked that? Was it also you looking at your stats and thinking, oh my goodness, we're becoming a two icon destination? And then how has that worked out? How have you been doing?
Yeah, that's exactly how the conversation went with David. Thanks, Natalia. We were at the Cape Grace opening, and we were talking about the geographical spread challenge, and I kind of said, we're so tired of just selling Cape Town and Kruger, because we've always prided ourselves in having this robust an interesting selection of product countrywide that we sell. I mean, we've always been very creative, and we've just seen that dwindle, exactly as Ilana was alluding to. And I think, even though there are those macro environmental factors that are out of our control, and it's certainly not just on the South African side, as Ilana said, our international partners that we work with really are struggling. We've seen a huge loss of skill within the staff, not just consulting skill, but product managers have left the industry. And I think, just kind of even people not being in the office, all that incidental learning and understanding and knowing how to sell outside of a very small option. And I think also what Ilana said is those the companies have not had the time to get their staff out on educational spends have been cut. A lot of companies sell the whole of Africa, so they'll come on one educational to South Africa and do Cape Town and Kruger, and it's a long time before they come back. They generally seem to be quite young and transient, so sometimes we don't even get them to come back. They've gone already on to something more exciting or different. So I think retention and education is a real thing, and I think we can probably, you know, influence the retention less, although New Frontiers has done a lot to work on our own staff retention because we understand the value of people that know how to sell well. But in terms of our international partners, obviously harder to control. But what we can control is that is the education and the influence, and just bringing that awareness to why it's important. I think a lot of our international guys don't even understand that it is important to have that geographical spread. It's not sustainable just to be selling into 2 centers. And actually, when, you know, being on the sales side and interacting with those guys, and when you have meetings and they're talking about wanting to increase their growth to South Africa or Southern Africa, it's a really great opportunity for us as an industry, as DMCs here, to say that's going to be really hard unless you start coming alongside us and educating your teams on how to sell out of those 2 centers, because essentially we're blocking ourselves out. And, you know, that high season in those areas are just spreading and spreading. You know, you used to be able to get, you know, lots of comps for agents in May in Kruger. That's not the case anymore. Okay, now we could get comps and stuff for educationals in October, November. Not true anymore. We kind of, you know, pegged into either December, January, Feb. Those are the quieter months in Kruger now. So out of a whole year, you've only got 3, which is great because now we've spread that seasonality. But now outside of that, we need to spread the love to the other areas. So our focus as a business, after just kind of settling down after COVID and seeing where the rest of the industry is, and it is quite a shock. The one in 2023, I remember seeing one of our big UK clients, and they had actually put South Africa on stop sell. It was March, because they said there was no availability. So I said, well, no, there's definitely availability. And then obviously in unpacking that, it was just that it was Cape Town and Kruger. So what they then did under pressure to obviously, you know, get their sales, they then start selling to other destinations. They leave the idea of South Africa and move on. So that's where the importance of upskilling is. And it has to be in partnership with whoever your international partners are. So we actually started, you know, soon after that penny dropped, really looking at how our role in educating our partners, because it hadn't really been a focus for us as a DMC. We had always worked in an environment where we kind of all grew as an industry together and people kind of had a good idea of what they were doing. So it was the first time we found ourselves in a situation where there were a lot of people who didn't know how to sell out of those 2 hotspot centers. So we got together as a product and a sales and marketing team and thought, okay, how do we present this destination on our agent portal? And we kind of really spent a lot of time brainstorming how we present. We started with KZN, obviously, because that's where our offices are, and we're proud you know, residents of KZN. So we thought, let's start with KZN, and looking at the numbers, we knew that that was one of the areas that were hardest hit. Our numbers were essentially a third of what they were post-COVID to what they were in 2019. So that was a very eye-opening exercise to do. And we kind of really tried to think out of the box. You know, we didn't want to say, oh, we're selling the mountains and the ocean. We all kind of have a good idea of what KZN's about. But how do we appeal to those young sellers, to those transient sellers? How do we capture their attention? How do we keep their interest? So we kind of rehashed our pages and did this hidden gem carousel that kind of really just gives you hooks, kind of what would be the unique, amazing things to come and visit KZN for. And I think my team are probably already kind of shaking their heads and saying, please don't let it go down this path, because anyone that would look slightly interested, I could ramble on for an hour about KZN. So I won't do that today, because there's actually a really good webinar that I did on the Africa Hub. And it kind of goes through how we are now pitching KZN with new energy and, you know, focus. And I think it does, you know, as David was saying, we're all in our foxholes and there's so much to do in a day. So to stop the bus and be intentional about pitching this product and making it interesting to sell and bringing the awareness to the destination. And it's got to happen on all sides of the supply chain. You've also got to get the suppliers on board. So we don't have KZN suppliers going and talking about the 8-bedroom lodge when people don't even know how to get there, because they have not even heard of KZN. So, you know, it really is, we have to keep reminding ourselves. And I remember somebody saying this at Experience Africa in 2022, we did that chat that lunchtime chat. I think it was Martina. She said, anything that was taught to people prior to 2019, don't expect that anybody knows that anymore. You have to start all over again. And I think it is frustrating. And I think there has been this perhaps wishing that that wasn't the case, but I think it really is. So, just unpacking and educating people around how to sell these areas, what is unique about these areas, not only from the sites that you can see, but the times of the year. KZN is obviously so different to the other areas. We have the best winters, we've got warm waters, perfect timing for that Northern Hemisphere holidays. Often got specials because it's never been popular in our winter time because it's always catered to the US market. Then also thinking, how do we make this destination that hasn't traditionally catered to the US when we've seen such a rise in numbers? How do we appeal to that market? So we pitch it slightly differently. We've kind of been drawing out why that safari is better. Well, not better, different in KZN to other safari destinations, and how we can link it, and what you kind of can tick off the box here versus there, some of the amazing conservation efforts, and really just putting a different spin on things, even the battlefields, kind of trying to get it out of that box of only being appealing to a history buff, trying to sell the idea of it being the lost art of storytelling. We've got such a visual world that we live in. So to try and kind of bring that to the fore, that it can be a really incredible location and holiday. It is set in a rural location. I actually went to the battlefields with my family last July, kicking and, well, not kicking and screaming, but definitely dragging their heels, the teenagers. And they all came away actually apologizing that they'd had a bad attitude up front because they were completely spellbound by the storytelling. We don't often get that, where we have to listen to a story and use our imagination. It's quite rare in the world that we live in at the moment. And just in this beautiful setting, only an hour from the Berg. And it really was... an eye-opener. And I actually bumped into foreign tourists there that had been in Cape Town, and he was saying how much he was loving this stop, because he said he had been in Cape Town, the winelands, and how amazing it was, but this was the Africa he was looking for. This was the big blue skies and the open spaces and the rural villages, and the connection with locals. And with KZN being in a state of almost under tourism, our lodges and our establishments are owned by South Africans. They own, run, and manage. Those people are truly invested. And you are connecting with locals. So it has a lot. So it's to bring that out and to bring it to the fore and to use that to influence and to educate. And we actually, linking onto that is then you've got to close the loop every step that you go. So making sure that when someone comes through for an educational, that's very stock standard, pitching to them, why don't you rather do this? What about, have you been to KZN? Why don't we do a little trip here for you? And we actually managed to get our two biggest agents, product managers, on KZN trips this last year. And we've already seen the positive offspin of that. They've already got product loaded on their side. They've done training with us and their teams. And we're really hoping we see the fruits of that in the year to come. So I think that it's a real concerted effort, going on webinars, doing the Africa Hub, bringing that awareness. It would be great if we had a tourism organization that was really alongside us, but like many things in South Africa, we privatize these things, and we can do it, and we do it, and we all need to be on that same train of thought. It is easier to just sell the stock standard because that's what people are asking for, but it doesn't mean that it's right, and it doesn't mean we must just press on and do that. So we nearly had a FAM together with SA Tourism in the UK, so we'll keep trying those avenues, but I do think the other thing that we can influence, and that perhaps as a private sector we should think of, is a PR push. You hear it repeatedly from the US, is places like Zambia are not on their radar because what they see on their media streams are the Delta, or Cape Town, is East Africa. And that's why we see, the business channeling in there. It's what they know, what they feel comfortable with. And our even though we have SA Tourism, and SA Tourism does fulfill some of those needs for us, I think in terms of PR to counter some of the negative news, you don't have to look very far to get negative news. And it came up repeatedly on a recent sales trip that there's plenty of that going around at the moment. And, that's again, an experienced seller can get over those hurdles to make the sale. the less experienced seller, that will be a block, that'll be a barrier. So I think that, you know, we perhaps need to somehow, I know Zambia has just employed a PR company, so maybe we should just watch and see how that goes. But I think that we need some positive PR for South Africa as a destination, and then those lesser known areas as well.
Thanks, Faith. Helen, sorry, Faith. There was a lot in there, and I am probably going to put a bit of a spanner in the works and say, again, what we want to sell is not necessarily what people want, essentially. And even when you start upskilling people and teaching people, at the end of the day, if the demand does not exist from their clients, we can teach them KZN until the cows come home. If their clients are not asking for KZN, the sell for them is very hard, because they're now, they might be onboarded with it, but their client's not coming and asking for KZN. So now they've got to try and change their clients' minds. So they might be completely aligned with what we want and see that it's the right thing to do. But I think the client demand is actually going to drive things. And amazing that you're doing all of this work. And Susie, you guys had a postal code at ITB Berlin. You had your whole, like, there was a whole area that was sense of Africa. I'm curious, when you are talking to your trade partners and doing all the great work that, like, Helen has been talking about from a training perspective, how do you embed this idea of geographic spread? How on board are they with, aligned to the vision of geographic spread? And then taking that a step further, what are they doing to assist you with that geographic spread and getting their end customer to demand the destination? Because without that consumer demand, it's dead in the water. There's no way we can move forward.
Thanks, Natalia, and thank you, Helen, because I see we kind of sharing this topic, so some great insights from you as well. Yeah, I think, you know, so much of the consumer demand is out of our hands as DMCs. Because essentially so many of us are still predominantly in a B2B environment, not in a B2C environment. And we are actually more reliant on our own clients, agents and tour operators around the world. And of course, very, very much reliant on DMOs and other organizations that are pushing the appetite for South Africa as a destination. So, you know, for us, it's a bigger challenge, because we need to get a number of people in the distribution channel to be on board with, you know, with selling, first of all, South Africa, but then looking at, you know, how you can move this geographical spread around. And I think, you know, I think also for some of us, you know, that difficulty and that challenge in being closer and more in touch with the end consumer, you know, definitely makes it harder to drive that demand, because a lot of the requests and a lot of the inquiries for the geographical spread are potentially coming from repeater travelers. And it's not to say that we don't have repeater travelers, but I think a lot of those repeater travelers very often tend to then move to kind of, you know, online booking options, and perhaps directly with hotels through TripAdvisor and so on. So it's harder for us to monitor from a DMC point of view just what that repeater spend, you know, actually looks like. I think a way in which many of us, you know, can actually do that is with our product, and it's also with things like, you know, group tour operators. So a lot of group tour operators run that particular, you know, typical highlights of South Africa, where it's a Cape Town and a Kruger, and perhaps some of them have a bit of KZN, or they have a little bit of the garden route included. But, you know, potentially a lot of them have repeat customers. And I think therein lies opportunity too, for some different itineraries to be put together. And there you already have people who have a lot of trust and faith in the destination. So the fear of traveling to an African country and, you know, all those things are now removed, because people have done your typical and your iconic itinerary. And I think if they have a trusted brand name behind them, you know, being one of their large operator companies that they always book with, you have a far better chance of trying to push that spread in different parts of South Africa. You know, a number of our trade partners have got customers that have done 40 or 50 of their tours around the world. in a group tour environment. And so I think those can be some ideal opportunities for pushing different types of itineraries. Similar to what Helen has mentioned, we have something that we call travel twists. It's about 40 or 50 different short and small itineraries and excursions and day trips, 1 or 2 nights overnight, which focus on the off the beaten track type of destinations. And it's just so important to keep talking about that, constantly in every opportunity that we have. When it comes to fam trips that many of us are responsible for arranging, recently we did one in the UK market where we actually said we're doing Gauteng, 2 nights in Johannesburg. We're doing Mpumalanga, kind of outside of the Kruger National Park. Of course, we're going to do a night in the Kruger as well. And then we're heading up to Limpopo. And we had an absolute rush on bookings in the incentive to qualify for this trip. And I mean, sadly, at the end of the day, our budget allowed for, about 10 people to travel. We didn't go anywhere near to the city of Cape Town on this particular trip. And we actually had some first-time people traveling who hadn't been to South Africa, but the trip still appealed to them. So I think, that's a lot of responsibility, on our side to also actively be driving combinations. Not for 1 minute am I saying not sell Cape Town or don't sell Kruger, but I'm saying where can we combo up some of those iconic parts of our country with the lesser known things. So, perhaps this also involves a lot of the trade partners. It involves suppliers and different properties. So how good would it be to see that a property in Cape Town, is then also partnering up and packaging something with a like-minded property that's near to the Ograbi's Fall or the Falls or the Kgalagadi area. Why don't we put a property like at Tswalu, in with something that's in the Isimangaliso wetlands. So it's a thing of, to me, it's often hard to say to consumers and to tour operators, we're not including certain iconic parts. I think they are important, but I think it's important also to combine them up with some of our lesser known areas. And this is really important. From a private sector point of view, I think when we see different road shows run by lots of our industry colleagues, going into all sorts of source markets that are either mature or developing, we would want to think that the selection of the participants on a roadshow also has some kind of strategy to it, that it isn't just limited to Cape Town properties and Kruger lodges. That's another way in which we can ensure that there's a good representation at so many of these private sector trade shows and road shows that take place, where the selection process of exhibitors actually covers a much bigger geographical spread, and it creates that opportunity. So I think, that's another area where we have to be very, very prudent. But for us as DMCs, it definitely comes down to our product development. It comes down to our business development and the material that we give out to our trade partners, what they're going to stock, their supermarket shelves with. And I think that it's so important that we are able to include much more geographical spread, that we are not just focused on the iconic areas. And although it doesn't always benefit, the entire South Africa, but combination itineraries where we can include some of the regional iconic destinations too, does go a long way to bringing business also into South Africa. So whilst we might not always be able to have a 10 or 12 night itinerary that is focused purely on South Africa as a destination, for a lot of people who do want to put some combinations together, again, there's also some incredible geographical spread opportunity, where it's not, simply then the Delta and Victoria Falls, Helen, you touched on Zambia. You know, often there, a lot of properties are looking for business. And so again, there's no harm in combining Cape Town and the winelands with the safari being in Zambia, if that's also a way to, you know, to divert the spread. So I don't think it's only a South African regional spread or geographical spread that is a challenge. I think it's also a regional spread. And we need to work more closely together on that too.
Thanks, Susie. I see Helen's agreeing with you. Johan, you work in the most exotic markets. Now, we've been talking about the traditional markets, the guys that have been our bread and butter for many, many, many years. Your data shows slightly better geographic spread, particularly with the Indian and Southeast Asian markets. What is it about these markets that makes them more receptive to kind of going beyond the Cape Town Kruger scenario? You're on mute. Ah. Still on mute. Oh, okay. Hang on. Let me see if I can't unmute you. I can't unmute you. There you go. There you are. You're unmuted. You were. Now you're on mute again. Still on mute.
Am I now
There you
unmuted?
are. Now we've got you. Now we've got you. Go.
Thanks a lot. Yes, I think our geographical spread is slightly different because, to a degree, we work in markets where there's no history of how people travel to South Africa or a traditional way of traveling to South Africa. So we are slightly more in control in where we put people and what we sell to them. And also, a lot of these markets, I think they travel for a different reason than what the traditional markets travel. How they travel and where they travel. A lot of the traditional markets have gone to a more slower pace of travel, and they want to slow down and stay at one place, whereas a lot of the emerging markets are still, South Africa is new to them. They want to see as much as possible in the shortest time, which allows us to include a bigger geographical spread. We've seen some of our Asian markets where they're 5 nights in South Africa, but they cover 3 different provinces. So out of a traditional market, you would never get people coming to South Africa for 5 nights and covering 3 different provinces, including Western Cape, say, Gauteng, plus either Mpumalanga or Northwest or Limpopo. So we are in a slightly different position there, that we can dictate more, and there's not this is the traditional and what everybody should be doing scenario, which allows us to push in geographical spread, and what you've then seen in our numbers and why it's different from many of the others.
Right, then, so I guess if we start talking about value versus volume, right? Do we want that level of spread? Do you want people to be constant? Does Helen want more people to stay in KZN for a week than than having 20 people come to KZN for 1 day? Then we start having that discussion, right, Helen?
Correct.
So there is 2 sides of the coin in that respect. And emerging markets might be a way of getting more numbers for shorter times in different areas, where some of the traditional markets, their focus would be to have less people, a longer time in a different geographical area that's not traditionally on an itinerary. So yeah, and I think from an emerging market point of view and not being in the traditional markets, some of the things that I can say is, like, if I look at what's happening in the traditional markets, it's pure the free market system working. As you said, Natalia, we might want to have people in certain areas, but the demand dictates where people are going. And the Kruger and Cape Town, or the Western Cape, have marketed them exceptionally well. And so that's where people go. We will have to find a way to get people to see the other areas and also want to go there. You can't force people to go to a certain area. I think a lot of the DMOs and government, they work on a supply model. This is what we want to sell. This is where you need to go. So this is what we're selling. They're not going into a market and analyzing and seeing, this is how that market works. This is what appeals to them. This is what other destinations, why are they doing well in that specific market, and adjusting their marketing message to appeal to that market, and get them to look at different areas, not because it's what we want to sell, but it's because we have sold it in a way that it appeals to them.
That is the seminal insight of the day, Johan. Mic drop. That's exactly where my mind has been. So supply driven is kind of, we are wanting to push something, but that does not necessarily translate into what people want, essentially. And the popularity of a Cape Town, I can tell you, is more because of travelers going and telling everybody else how amazing it was, and less because we're doing an amazing Cape Town marketing job. That's just my view. Exactly. And also looking at those specific markets, we have this massive and had this amazing repeater rate. Our markets are getting younger and younger and younger. And culturally, from a behavioral perspective, they are not the types of people who are going to be repeaters, the younger generation. So backing that horse would be a mistake. David mentioned it right from the start, really getting that data, understanding what markets we are working with, what those behaviors are, and then tailoring what it is that we have to that specific demand is where we need to go. Now, I'm going to throw my hat over to Monica, who definitely has a lot of experience when it comes to destination marketing. And Mon, I mean, we've just been talking about Cape Town and how amazing Cape Town is. We often forget that the Western Cape is more than Cape Town. Sorry, Cape Townians. And that there is a gambit of other, I live in the Swartland, which is not very popular with overseas tourists, I can tell you that much. Mon, garden route, that used to be sexy. Is it still sexy? Tell me a little bit about the geographic spread issues that you have in the Western Cape and your views on what we've been talking about over the last 40 minutes.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah, I've been making loads of notes, and the garden route is definitely a topic that I want to speak about. But first, I want to kind of talk a little bit about something that David spoke about right in the beginning, which is about the success of East Africa, and how they have handed us our hat when it comes to recovery. And I think there's something in there, and I think some of my colleagues from the industry have spoken about it already, but it's something that we need to kind of also wrap our brains around, which is that the global industry is time poor. There's skill shortages globally. Ilana spoke about it briefly. And obviously everyone up until now, there's been a race for recovery after the pandemic. And so people are going to sell what's easy to sell. They're going to, the first prize is a fly and flop destination where all I have to book is a flight and a hotel, and then that's it. And then second prize, and actually the complete perfect prize is a 5-star fly and flop, because then I make the most amount of commission, and I don't have to do a hell of a lot of selling. And sort of right down at the bottom, as David said right in the beginning, is this multi-center smarty box approach that we historically had in South Africa. And so I think one of the reasons why this Kruger and Cape Town, or Safari and Cape Town thing has started happening is because it's just easy for people to understand. They don't have to come here to see it. They can sort of wrap their head around it. And frankly, it's evident based on the numbers that certainly historically, South Africa is not winning the safari race either. I think that maybe some of the overcrowding images of the Mara in the last season maybe are helping our numbers in South Africa again a little bit now. But ultimately, we are fighting a continental fight around safari. And so that's the first thing that I just wanted to kind of say, is that there's an opportunity, and I'll speak about some sort of easy wins a little bit later, but the opportunity for us is really about solving for the future rather than trying to recover from the past. And so we need to have a look at what do repeaters want. They're 100% more intrepid, but they're not going to be necessarily found in Ilana's data or in Helen's data or in Susie's data. They're going to be somewhere else. Gen Z, where does Gen Z book? Are they still going to go through the channel that the traditional DMC is servicing? I don't know. I'm not so sure. And then I think what Johan spoke about so eloquently, I think is another consideration. The new markets are a big opportunity for us, and the big noise at the moment, certainly in the DMO space, is around China and India in particular. And there's a real opportunity for us to hit the reset button. Certainly in the Chinese market, there is a huge amount of travel interest for destinations outside of the norm. There's a huge amount of Chinese travelers that are very responsive to exotic destinations. And we have an opportunity now to package the destination in a way that it isn't the old Chinese itineraries of Joburg, Sun City, and Cape Town that we all know from back in the day. So there's an opportunity for us to really start telling the story of South Africa across. The other thing that I want to speak a little bit about is the iconicity of the destination. So I was lucky enough to work at SAT in the aftermath of the Soccer World Cup, and arguably the easiest time SA Tourism ever had to sell the destination was in that sort of 5-6 year period after the Soccer World Cup, because it was clear to the world who we were as people. Those vuvuzelas, I think people still talk about the buzzing in the stadiums when people were watching the soccer, and we were believed when we said that South Africa's point of difference is our people. And unfortunately, we have now moved very far from that. And there is no clear value proposition for the destination nationally. And I don't think that we have spent enough time being intentional about who we want to be and what we want to stand for. I was speaking to Natalia earlier. My classic example at the moment is season 3 of The White Lotus. I don't know who of you have started watching it. But there's this, as a consumer, I've got this very clear image of what Thailand is. And I have an understanding that no matter where in Thailand I go, that is what I'm going to get. Which makes a regional spread argument so much easier to make, because it doesn't matter if you're in Clarence or if you're in Constantia, the feeling is going to be the same. And so I think there's something there that I can't solve, certainly, alone, certainly not. But I think there's something there about us needing to hang our hat on a new sort of crisp brand promise of South Africa, without which I think all of this heavy lifting is going to be almost impossible to do. I do understand the safety issue, and I think the safety issue is a key concern, and I wish that I could wave a magic wand and have a solution for that, but unfortunately we do not patently. But around the infrastructure, for me, the infrastructure argument, yes, of course, we would all do better if we had better roads and if it was easier to get to places and whatever. But Namibia does just fine, and 60-70% of their roads are not tarred. And so I feel like we also use that as an excuse maybe sometimes. So I think sometimes we can also, if we understood who we were as a destination, we could sell it in a way that it actually currently is, rather than trying to take it back to, some sort of era that we were in. And then lastly, my final point really is those easy to do practical things that we can perhaps collaborate on. And this is going to be tough maybe for the industry to hear, but I think what we do need to do, Susie, is we need to not only package for your TourVest customer, we need to create circuits that are understandable by the industry. In the same way that, I guess, a lodge operator is offering a circuit in Kenya, perhaps there's a way. So we do it a little bit in the Western Cape. So we say we have this circuit called the Cradle of Human Culture. So if you're interested in paleo, if you're interested in, the history of the place, we've created a little route that you can do, and we promote the hell out of it. It's got its own little microsite, and it tells the story of the destination with a certain lens. So if we could, as a collective, industry and DMO together, come up with more easily sellable, easily packageable ways to experience the destination. And then obviously where you stay and how you get around, and is it a private vehicle, or are you flying in, or are you self-driving? All those things you can kind of figure out. But if we can find 5 or 6 things that the country can stand for, and then really as a collective get behind telling the story in that way, perhaps it's a little way for us to start moving people into being a little bit more experimental in how they experience our destination.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, I was thinking about that kind of market segmentation. And, you know, when you're a birder, you don't bird specifically in a specific area. If you have circuits, it makes it easier to establish that geographic spread. We've had quite a few questions. If you do have a question, please feel free to throw that into the chat. I'm going to just run through a few of those, and I'll ask my panelists if there's a specific question that you would like to respond to. Just unmute yourself so that I can call on you to answer that question. We had a comment actually from Alana, who was talking about flights being an issue, the high cost of international flights, as well as domestic connections, availability, price, and bookability. There are only 2 flights a day at the times. Aren't great for international leisure. I think that's probably the same case in East Africa. East Africa probably also has accessibility issues. That also doesn't help self-drive itineraries. We had a comment from Rinsa saying travel agents and DMCs have an important advisory role to play. Don't just book what ignorant clients ask, but ask them what they really expect and want from their holiday, and then suggest the best possible itinerary for them. There are brilliant and more affordable alternatives for Kruger, and there are lots of interesting places just a few hours from Cape Town. I think we're all agreed on that. It's just that the demand is not for those specific ones. I think this one is for you, Helen. Do you think the 2 billion Rand Club Med development set to open in 2026 is going to kickstart tourism in KZN?
Oh my gosh, are we hanging our hats on that hope? Well, I've been to a Club Med, and I did say to my husband, God help them when they put their toe in that North Coast water, they're going to be out in Australia before they know it, because it's so wild. I said, I hope they're going to build a concrete pool in the ocean, but he did point out not a lot of them went into the ocean, so they just kind of look at it but hang by the pool close to the bar. So yeah, I mean, it's got some solid backing. They've broken ground. It's all supposed to be happening next year. It's supposed to be open. So and it is supposed to be a combo with the safari element. So yeah, it's they actually even put the tender out for the day tour experiences from the resort the other day. So it all is definitely happening. And what that'll do for KZN, I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, it'll be an interesting space to watch. But you know, any kind of development can only be good. And just to kind of visibility, go back to the kind of theme that's been going on since I spoke, I think it's not so much that we want to convince people to come to KZN, but we want to put it back on the table. I think when you see numbers drop to 1/3 of what you had before, you know that there was something there. And because I'm educating 3 very expensive children, this is where our holiday. And I know how amazing this place is. I can't go very far. No internal flights. I have to get in my car and drive on holiday. But you know, it is an amazing part of the world, and there is something special to it, but it's just that it's not known. So I think that it's not to force people to come here, and I think that there will, you know, that's not the case. But I do think that we all have responsibility to educate and to bring awareness back to forgotten areas or areas that are just not known by those new sellers. But I mean, I love some of what everyone said after that. There's so much food for thought here.
Maybe I'll just stick with you, Helen, for a second. We have had quite a few questions around public-private partnerships in terms of generating the visibility and being more aligned as, you know, like an SA Tourism or a KZN Tourism and then private sector. Do you think that that is something that has changed, and one of the reasons why we perhaps don't have the visibility in certainly the KwaZulu-Natal scenario? And after you've commented on that, if I may just go over to Mon and ask Mon to talk about the garden route example, because there we have this public-private sector scenario working together. So your perspective first, and then we'll move on to Mon, just talking about that kind of public-private and singing off the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, I don't think that there's ever really been a very strong connection, if I'm completely honest. I think that we've always worked quite separately, in my experience. I mean, somebody may have had a different experience, but I don't think that that's the reason that we see in the drop off, but I think that if there were to be collaboration, we'd see the benefits. I do think that we need more conversation. And, you know, if we saw how powerful private sector was during COVID with all our lobbying and all our getting together when we had time to, because we weren't doing anything, we weren't doing sales. But when we had that energy and we were able to lobby things and get things going, you know, with government, we saw success. And I think that we need more of that partnership. I think that we have kind of gone, I think that we're not aligned as much as we should or could be.
Okay.
And I do think that would benefit.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Natalia. Sorry, man, I completely went on a tangent and forgot to answer your garden route question. So I think people know that this is not something that Westgrow can claim. This was actually Peter Dross's idea, who was back then the SATSA garden route chapter chair. And in fact, his hobby horse for a number of years before I joined Westgrow. But essentially, maybe let me talk about it more conceptually. So whilst this might be news to some people, I'm not sure. Certainly at provincial level, the DMO budget is shrinking at the rate of knots. So anyone that understands what's happening to the fiscus, you can hear what Godongwana said yesterday. It's not a pretty picture, and we as DMOs are getting less and less money. So more and more, the burden actually rests in the private sector in terms of being able to provide at least some sort of crowdsourced funding around particular initiatives. Think Cape Town Air Access or Cruise Cape Town, or in this instance, the Garden Route JMO. So the idea was born from concepts like creating a regional brand. And so if you think California, or if you think Tuscany, or if you think, I don't know, Gold Coast, or, you know, you associate brand, you associate experiences at almost regional level. And we wanted to kind of start that journey in the Western Cape province to kind of, also, I think a little bit because Western Cape actually is a nothing name. Like, you know, I'd rather actually be in Mpumalanga than be Western Cape, because Western Cape is just, you know, Cape is a word that exists across the world. It just doesn't make us unique. And West is just a wind direction, right? So Western Cape, it's the same as South Africa. It's a very sort of like an inspiring name. But anyway, so we wanted to, because Garden Route is a known place. Like, there is some knowledge globally around what the Garden Route is, at least B2B. People know what the Garden Route is and what they can sort of associate with it. So we thought it was a good place to start building these regional brands. The vision ultimately would be that rather than talking Western Cape, you can talk about the Garden Route in Klein Karoo, and industry certainly globally would be able to associate key experiences and brand value around that. Weskus, people would know, okay, cool, that's where you get the crayfish, and that's where you get the lekker flowers and whatever. You know, Karoo is where you get sort of the real dances and the real sort of stargazing experience, etc., etc. So you could really sort of package your province in smaller routes and smaller sort of brand essences, if you will. So, but because we don't have the budget, we thought, let's partner with private sector to get this off the ground and really start, you know, putting the brand forward. And so that's where we are. So it's ourselves, it's SATSA, it's the youth and adventure chapters of SATSA, it's FedHasa, and it's the Garden Route District Municipality that are clubbing together to try and to enhance this Garden Route and Klein Karoo brand in a way that it kind of also sticks in the minds of the industry globally.
Thanks, Mon. We had a few people talking about, well, what about Free State? What about Eastern Cape? And I mean, this is the irony, right? We are all on this call. We all love all the different parts of South Africa, and we're all still talking about the same areas. Even when we talk about geographic spread, we're talking about Mpumalanga. We're talking about the Garden Route, etc. So even within this grouping that's sitting here, some of the other questions were centered around skills development. And Helen, you guys have been doing a lot of training, which Susie was talking about, the fam trips, etc. How do we as a collective pool our resources? Because now obviously I'm wanting to go into solution mode. How do we do this better? Understanding that we have our partners overseas who are selling our destination are as short-staffed as we are, and as a result have junior staff members who don't know the destinations to the extent that they should know them and cannot offer what it is that we have to offer in a meaningful way because they don't have that experience? How do we as an industry work a little bit better so that what we do from an education perspective is more meaningful than everyone doing their little bit? Is there an answer to that? Anyone have an idea? Everyone's leaning back, so no one has an idea. Helen, go.
I thought I'd save you, Natalia. I didn't want to leave you hanging. So the Africa Hub, Anita and her crew, we actually refer a lot of new sellers to her platform because it's the 101 basic. And that's really what we've never done before. We've never done, well, we touch on it maybe occasionally, but it was never the need that it is now. And I think they've done such an exceptional job. And they have destination experts that kind of do webinars for them, and they have different sections where you can draw all kinds of information around weather and access and all kinds of resources. So that does already exist. And perhaps that's something that we should support more intentionally, because we're one destination expert on there, but because it's such a big destination, perhaps we should have a few more people contributing and some different ideas coming onto that platform. She does have a lot of sign up. So that is something that's already existing and it works really well. And it's a good avenue for us to point new sellers to. Whether they use it or not is then a different story. You know, people have to be invested in educating themselves. But I think that we are one destination that doesn't do organized fam trips. I constantly hear from my UK guys that they're on another fam trip to East Africa, which I think is something we've never done. So perhaps we have been speaking to suppliers about that more recently, but that's also tricky because you can't necessarily comply, it's combining suppliers, the right suppliers that they're happy with. It's a bit more complex in South Africa compared to some of the other supply chains where you can circuit things more easily, where we've just got such a huge amount of product here. It can get a little bit tricky. So, but it's definitely something that we could put our heads around. But I think that, some more of that would go a long way. There's no better education than getting people on the ground.
Yeah. An interesting comment from Andrea about the travel advisories. I feel like we have a travel advisory every 6 weeks that comes out. So I don't know. I know it is a barrier for certain of our source markets, but I feel like that's always been in place, unless I'm mistaken. So I kind of wonder the extent to which one would actually try and deal with that specifically as a destination. Because again, it's for South Africa, it's not for a region.
I think that's less of a concern for me than the bad press. I think you're right. Those advisories have been in place for a long time. Most of them, they come and go, and they do flare, and there is sometimes conversation with agents around that. But I think just general bad press is far more damaging.
Yeah. There were a couple of questions around this idea of off the beaten track. Now I'm thinking about, okay, so now we're wanting to sell destinations that are typically not destinations that are sold on a regular basis. Now we go out with this kind of off the beaten track brand or off the beaten track idea, and it's cheaper. And I don't know, is that, maybe Mon, you can speak to that. Is that something we want to go after? Do we want to push out an off the beaten track kind of value for money type? Is that the brand we should be going after, I guess, is my question.
Thank you for picking on me, because I really would like to answer this question. It's a bit of a thorny issue. I mean, the Smarty Box thing was a conversation that we always used to have when I was at SA Tourism, and it's something that I think we need to guard ourselves against. So I guess similar to what you're asking, I guess we have to ask ourselves, what's the desired state? Is the desired state that all 9 provinces get the same amount of tourism and get the same amount of visitors and get the same amount of spend from all the markets? Is that the desired state? Because I don't think that's realistic. I think there are some provinces that are going to be our tourism destination provinces, and then there are some provinces that probably aren't, or where like really your 5th time around tourist is going to come, or your overlander truck is going to drive through, or where your really intrepid guys are going to go and try some game reserves that no one is commonly visiting or whatever. So I think we need to also just be clear on what our desired state looks like. I don't think it is the current state. I think that even in the Western Cape, I think Cape Town gets 95% of the love, and then Westville has to do a substantial amount of heavy lifting to get people through the tunnel and even to a wine estate on the other side of the Huguenot Tunnel. And so I don't think it's where we are. I'm not saying that for a moment, but I think that also we shouldn't get too crazy about everybody getting the same amount of share of the pie. I think we need to pick who's going to score the try and who's going to be in the scrum. I think that's really where you got to be in terms of the country. We can't all be Cape Town. We can't all be the Kruger. So that's, I think, the first point. And I just want to refer again to what we were talking about earlier. I think we need to meet the traveler where the traveler is, where our potential visitor is. It's not about selling what's on the shelf. It's about making sure that our destination responds to what the market that we want to go after is asking for. And I don't think that we have a clear enough picture of what that is. I do still think that the channel certainly wants to return back to how things were historically, and I don't think that that's possible. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And if you want to keep the genie in the bottle, then you've got to go after new markets that still need buses and guides, and you can still control the itinerary. If you want to maximize the traditional markets, you're going to have to become innovative and solve today's problems and not yesterday's problems. So I think that once you've got a clear brand and a clear value proposition for the destination, and you know which travelers you're targeting from which markets, then you can make sure that you also develop the destination in a way that it actually responds to that rather than the other way around.
Thanks, Mon. We are 10 minutes out, so I'm going to put every single panelist on the spot. I want you to give me one catalytic thing that we can do as the industry. If you were going to back a horse to get this geographic spread that we were talking about, what would the one thing be that you would put your attention on, understanding that we need to focus on the things that we can control? So what can we control? Give me one catalytic project that we as the private sector can control. And I'm going to start with Ilana. I'm not going to start with you because you just gave me those eyes. I'll start with you, Han.
Thanks for putting me on the spot. I think we need to change the way we think and become consumer focused and give the consumer what they want, but packaging it for all parts of the country that it's appealing to them.
Nice one. Thank you, Johan. Susie.
I see lots of comments about fam trips. Some of them not necessarily, in support of fam trips, but I'm a great believer in them. I think they need to be credible. I think they need to be very targeted and focused. You need to have the right people on them. And I think we can do all the amounts of marketing and talking and, destination training and many, many things that where we pushing, we pushing into the market. But I actually think that the kind of pull factor there is the new players in our industry coming out to South Africa and actually experiencing things firsthand. And it doesn't always have to be a fam trip, but it can also be various trade shows. It can be hosted bio opportunities, but it needs credible return on investment. So it's got to be the right kind of focus. You can have qualifying, reasons to qualify, to participate in something like that. And I think if many of us looked at our kind of sales and marketing budgets that we have, we tend to allocate far more money on our own international sales trips and attending various trade shows. And I'm not saying that those are not important, but I think, something that many of us could do is switch that around and see that we have a lot more allocated towards hosted buyers, credible selected fam trips with return on investment. For newcomers into the market who don't know the destination, I think that there's enormous opportunity for that.
Thanks, Susie. Lance, over to you.
Oh, if I can unmute myself. I think for me, the theme within our business is collaboration. I have 15 competitors who work together and truly collaborate. And I think it's a very loosely used term in our industry here. I think we have, SATSA has the sales forum, which exists, but there isn't anything like that that exists on the DMC side. So I think I would like to see a resurrection of the DMC forum, where we can sit down around a table on a monthly basis. It can be a Zoom table, that's fine, and have some meaningful and collaborative DMC discussions. And maybe it's a biannual or quarterly matching and marrying with the sales forum where we can talk together, because I think there are always different lenses and different perspectives to challenges, and I think talking about them is healing.
Great idea. Great idea. Helen.
Oh, I feel like I've said a lot. So I think this is a great start. I think this is amazing, just to be talking about it and hearing different people's point of view. Found some really interesting takeaways. But I think we'll carry on with how we've started. So we've started with KZN, we're doing the Eastern Cape and Garden Route. We've done Zimbabwe. So as Susie was saying, we're looking at that regional spread as well. And not necessarily to force a client to buy anything, but just to get those numbers back up to where they should be, and just to educate people around what they don't know, just because they don't have the experience and they haven't had the years and they haven't been to see all these places. So we'll continue on that path. But I think I really like what Monica was saying, just about us trying to identify what it is, what is our identity as a destination, and who are we appealing to, and what will appeal to them. I think that's an important part of it. So that's me.
Thanks, Helen. Bon.
There I am. Now I'm back. Hello. Sorry about that. For some reason, my connectivity was bad. Gosh, I also feel similar to Helen. I feel like I've said a lot today. I do want to just kind of comment on what Rinsa said in the chat just a little bit ago about this consumer trend. And I think we need to, and I had a conversation with Johan last week about the Indian market, and that's kind of blew the top of my head open. So when we talk about consumer trends, we're actually skewing west, global northwest, right? When we talk about consumer trends, largely we're talking about what the North Americans and the Europeans and the Brits are looking for. And that's fine. And they will want that authentic, transformative experience. You're 100% right, Rinsa. And, we were talking earlier at Web and Travel at this conference that we were at about, what luxury is, and, how luxury is actually just the scarcity of something. And so, yes, I think and we have that in spades in this country. We have loads of places where there is no other human being. And where you can see, with no light pollution, you can see the stars forever. It's really just about how you package it and how you show up in that space. Trying to minimize some of those experiences as actually being, backpacker things, or like for the roughing it people or whatever, is, I think, underselling it. So I think, other than all the things that I've already said, I think the thing that I would like us to kind of take away from here is really being honest about what this destination currently offers, and that there are, in fact, that really sort of pure, unfiltered, natural wonder that we have in spades in this country is the thing that we should sell, not just safari. Safari limits us. I mean, we're lucky in the Western Cape. We are one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. But we don't talk about that enough. We always just kind of hone in on the big five and and that's great and that's important, and it also helps us with conservation projects across the country. But we don't talk enough about just the wide open spaces and the biodiversity and the natural beauty and how rare it is to drive for kilometers and kilometers and not see a single other soul. And we don't do that enough. And so if I were to do anything, I would really sort of upsell how South Africa is one of those places where you can actually still go back to really experiencing the planet as if you were the only one on it. Thanks.
Thanks. And on that note, I'm going to hand it back to David. David, would you like to bring it all together and give us a closing, please?
Well, yeah, but firstly, let me grow my ponytail on my big catalytic idea. Huge dreadlock coming out. The one thing that I think, because in the main, we're not going to, this is changing a super tanker. So a lot of the same sort of stuff's going on. But I would really like to see us from a national perspective and really looking at South African tourism here. Look at doing something different and marketing, to different segments, because the flow into the country is not monolithic. And the one thing, and it's my old little chestnut here, is adventure tourism. So the great thing about adventure tourism is that most of the stuff that you do doesn't happen in the city. So it doesn't happen in Cape Town, and it doesn't happen in the game reserve. It happens sort of out there in the Eastern Cape. It happens in the Free State. And it appeals to a younger, more intrepid millennial market. But, New Zealand put themselves on a map as the adventure tourism capital of the world. People, go there to whitewater raft, to, do their bungees and everything else. And they had 5 activities. We've got 101 that we've identified. But we need a concerted marketing effort. It's that point that Mon made. You've got to go and actually create a demand. But you can only do that if you go and get the messaging right. So that's certainly something that I think I'd like to throw into the mix. And then just from our side, I just want to thank everybody. This is the start of a very necessary ongoing conversation. And what we'd like to do from our point of view is to host one of these once a month. Maybe after WTM in mid-April, but to bring some different actors into the space. I was chatting to Daryl Erasmus, who's the new CEO at SAT. It'd be lovely to get them into the room, to get some of the other provincial DMOs, to get the sales forum into the room, and to use what we have catalyzed. And let me say, there's been some really good, not only conversation today, but we've been, inundated with people, writing emails. Ignis from the Mantis collection had a really, really seminal email in which he spoke, I think, very eloquently on this issue. So what we're going to do on the website is we're creating a chat room where people can go and have ongoing conversations. We'll try and do a summary of today's meeting and distribute that. What are the key points and learnings that come out of it? Sorry, ex-Mantis. Thanks, Ignis. I'm a little slow up here in Josie, but we'll capture this, because I think there's a rich ongoing conversation that certainly needs to happen coming out of it. So the session will be recorded, but we'll create a space on that website. And what we'll also try and do is some of the key questions that have been posed in the chat room, we'll throw back to the panel and just get people to give us some answers to that, so that we keep this very necessary conversation alive. And I really like Ilana's point about that DMC forum. I just think that, that's useful, Ilana, not only on this, but on some of the other key aspects that we've been grappling with about a standardized approach to health and safety, looking at standardized contracting and sort of helping people. And then finally, from our side as SATSA, putting our money where our mouths are. We were thinking of having our conference in Kruger, but given the fact that Kruger is doing quite well, we have taken the decision that we're going to have our annual conference in a place we've never had it before, and that is going to be in Josie, Majosi, at the end of August. So come and find out, SATSA collectively, about what this cool city that I live in has to offer. I mean, there are incredible, there's an incredible rejuvenation program going on called Josie Majosi, but there are incredible things to do, and you know, getting it to be a 2 or 3 night stopover rather than a transient sort of airport lounge is, I think, part of pushing back on the skewed geographical spread we've seen. But just finally, I just want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank them not only for being part of the panel, but for giving so freely of their data and their information. I think that when you have that approach where we can share knowledge and share data, it puts us in a really useful position. And then to thank everybody who's joined us today, really appreciate your interest and support. And we'll keep this very rich conversation alive going forward. So thanks to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Josie Majosi, see you there in August, and have a lovely evening, everyone. Goodbye.
Cheerio.